Have you ever heard of a house style? Do you know what that is? Let me explain it. Hey, once upon a time, this is Perch. Once upon a time, there was this thing called house style. And what that basically meant was that certain creators, usually a small kind of run of creators, artists, would create kind of style guides or house style or style Bibles or character Bibles, or lots of different words for this. And it's funny because if you talk to different people, they'll insist that their term is the correct one. But really, there's lots of different terms for what is the same thing. It is a style guide for a particular character, and this is basically how tall they are, how their body is distributed, how the costume fits, if they're going to wear a jacket, what that looks like over a costume, what kind of clothes they might wear out of costume, all that kind of stuff. And this used to be very common, and you still get some old school artists or artists that kind of came up studying old school artists. You get a little bit of both that will create these style guides for characters, but they're not enforced like they used to. And when I say enforced like they used to be, there were people who kind of famously redrew parts of comics. I think John Romita, I knew kind of was I don't know. Well, he was hired, obviously, he was paid, but John Romita Sr. would redraw parts of a cover or change things if the artist in question put in something that kind of conflicted with the style guide or conflicted with house style of how a character, a villain, or something was represented. So you kind of go in. He was good at mimicking the style. He was able to kind of get it accurate, but not do so in a way that looked jarring from the original book. There's been a couple other people who have done this. Steve Ditko did do some of this, as I recall. I'm going completely off memory here. Jack Kirby has both done it and had it done to him, although very rarely, kind of nobody would touch Kirby's stuff. But it was a very common thing to have consistency matter, I guess is a better way to put it. Consistency in the style and the art and how the characters would be represented really mattered. And pretty famous in the, certainly in Jim Shooter's era, a little bit. I mean, various people have had it over time. There was this kind of unspoken rule or unspoken mentality in comics that every single panel, every single illustration could be licensed, could be a t-shirt, could be a mug, could be a poster, could be used somewhere else. So you need to get it right. And there was a certain pride in making sure that the art didn't go askew or drawn in a very, very different or random way. Now, as you exited the 80s and kind of got into the late 80s, early 90s, you started seeing both Marvel and DC experiment with very different styles. But if you look at, and a lot of people point to Todd McFarlane as being one of the first to kind of go down this path. Rob Liefeld's another. If you look at their art, if you look at kind of how they were drawing on the page, even though it was very stylized, it was very much a unique style. You look at Todd McFarlane's art, you can tell it's Todd McFarlane. It still corresponded to kind of some basics of how characters were supposed to look. I remember it used to bug me a lot, and then doing a meeting. Oh, who was I meeting at the time? It was one of the editors back then. But okay, so to get to the story first, maybe the name will come back to me. But it bugged me that Mary Jane would be depicted with a certain outfit, certain body type, certain hairstyle by Todd McFarlane, and Eric Larson would come along, and even though there was some similarities between the two style, suddenly Mary Jane would have a completely different haircut, hairstyle, and everything else. And it would bug me that from month to month, the characters had different looks to them that seemed to go kind of beyond style and into just one person not necessarily paying attention to what the other did. Now McFarlane and Larson obviously got along, and there was not a rivalry there, but in the years that would come in the late 90s, you would definitely see a shift where artists would come on to books and the editors would not place as much importance into making the house style, the character style look the same. And so this whole idea of needing to adhere to a style became it became addressed as this was restrictive or not letting the artist kind of be who they were. So you had you just had a shift in how people were represented and how things were done. And now, granted, the idea of adherence to a house style did create extra work for the artists. It required extra research, it required extra time, and in some cases, from the publisher standpoint, it required extra money to get the panels redrawn or to get something changed in the style of the book. Walter Simonson, kind of early on in some of the X Factor work that he did, I remember that some of the artists that followed or some of the annuals that were done by people other than him had to have some of the artwork redrawn because it wasn't kind of mapping to how the characters were. And if you take a look much further down in that run, you'll have people like Rusty and others just suddenly super huge muscular characters. So one of the things that it's interesting, the Extinction Agenda is kind of hailed as being a really solid, amazing story. And I think from a story perspective, there were some cool things that were going on. It was an interesting crossover and all the rest. But from an art perspective, that thing is all over the map. And I mean, it'll trigger your kind of ADHD of how these characters are represented. And in some cases, I think John Bogdanove had like these massive muscular characters kind of running around that are not, like Forge and some others suddenly look like, super bodybuilder types. And then, you see them kind of depicted by Barry Windsor Smith or John Romita Jr., a completely different body type. So, it's a kind of a matter of personal preference whether this bugs you or not as a reader. For me, it always irritated me when the styles would be all over the map. I don't think that was a good thing. I don't like it. But for others, it was again, it's no big deal. It's just art. Who cares, right? I don't know. To me, the lack of consistency in art and character styles and how they're represented, where kind of the height, the weight, the body shape, and everything else is bouncing all over the place. To me, that always screams kind of a lack of quality. It always, even if the artists are great on both ends. I mean, even if you went and you had, say, I don't know, you had George Perez doing an issue, who I like an amazing amount, and then you went right into Mark Silvestri. I like both of those artists, but if the art was more than just stylistically different, but the actual character themselves, I mean, they draw Jubilee. Let's say Jubilee is drawn by George Perez in his book as being kind of looking about like 18, small chested, if you will, body type. And then Mark Silvestri comes in and she looks, late 20s and she's got, triple D and just completely, that would bug me that it went from kind of one to the other from issue to issue. Because I think that's more than just the style of the artist coming out, that's actually changing the kind of very nature of the character and how the character looks. And I think that's, that shouldn't be how it is. I'll put it that way. But again, I've talked to many people who just don't care, and as long as the artist on the book is one that they like, can look any way they want. And I think the Extinction Agenda is an excellent example of a place where house style or character style just went right out the window. Nobody's paying attention at all to the style of what people are supposed to look like. I mean, how Rob Liefeld drew his characters and Jim Lee drew his characters, John Bogdanove drew his characters, just completely different from issue to issue. But it's well loved, well liked by people. So in that regard, maybe I'm in the minority there. Do I think house styles are coming back anytime soon? I doubt it. To me, it's linked with quality. So I think from an editorial standpoint, having house styles come back, having character style guides come back and be adhered to, the biggest trick there is that editorial would have to make sure they're produced, make sure they're distributed, make sure the artist teams that they're bringing onto the book read it, understand it, respect it, and deliver to it. And I don't see that. I mean, right now in editorial, just bluntly, frankly, there are misspelled words and kind of random, coloring errors and stuff that's all over the place. So if you've got if you got misspelled words and bad grammar and just goofiness going on in a comic, um, at that level, then the idea of kind of soliciting, maintaining, and adhering to a style guide just seems ridiculous. How in the world would that ever happen if none of the the even more basic fundamentals aren't happening? But I think it would be very helpful for a comic book company to do it, particularly with as we talk about kind of the movies coming in, and here put it this way: what's always been fascinating to me is that we hear from comics, and I've heard complaints at various times that there's this desire of synergy between the movie division and the comics, and if the movies do something to the characters, then the comics have to follow suit and kind of map to it. And I could argue both ends of that, if that's healthy or not. But what cracks me up is if you're being tasked to have better synergy with movies, if you're being told that you need to have these comics align more to a consistent guideline for IP purposes, then just having them align to that style guide would be a pretty quick and easy win. I mean, it would just be an easy way to accomplish a lot of this stuff. Just have the characters visually look the same from issue to issue or from team to team. I think it makes a stronger, more connected, more cohesive universe. And if you look at the movies, you look at the pains that Disney and Kevin have taken to having the movies look and be consistent and have a similar feel. Even when you got different directors and kind of different visions going on, you still try and maintain a consistent set of of how the visuals come out. So the fact that comics don't do this always feels a little bit like they're the kind of sloppy, thrown together at the last second um, comics. I will say, that DC does a better job and has traditionally always done a better job of protecting this and at least making more of an attempt to have a style guide and adhere to it. But it's just not it's not as important as it used to be, and I wish it was. I'd love for it to come back, but once again, I think a lot of fans right now don't particularly care, and I think a lot of editors don't care either. So unlikely to happen anytime soon. Anyway, what do you think? What do you think about the concept of a style guide, character guide, consistency? Does this matter to you? Were you a fan of Extinction Agenda and this bugged you, or you didn't care? How'd you feel about all of it? Leave a comment below. Love to hear your thoughts. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification, tell a friend. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.